Hi, welcome back. My name is Esther Kim and I hope everyone has been doing well. So I'm going to go over the math calculator section of the May 2021 SAT exam here, but I've broken down the videos into about 10 problems per video just because I think it's easier to digest that way. Also, if you're having difficulty with the math section, I recommend focusing on the earlier problems and knowing how to do those just because technically the problems are supposed to be getting harder as you move on. Okay, so let's get started. Question 1. It takes 6 hours to travel m miles. At this rate, how much time in hours will it take to travel 5m miles? So one thing that's really helpful from the beginning is just to figure out the units that your answer should be in. So they're asking you to find out how much time. So your units for your answers are going to be in hours. I'm going to approach this in 3 different methods, even though it's just question number 1, just so that you can have an idea of how to think about these problems. So the first way is really logical. If they're telling you that you travel m miles in 6 hours, and then they're asking you for how much time does it take you to travel for a distance that's 5 times as much, logically it would take you 5 times longer to travel that much. So this should just be 5 times 6, which is equal to 30 hours, which is going to be answer A. So the second method is dimensional analysis. So you take your 5m miles, and then you multiply by the rate that they gave you, which is 6 hours per m miles. So let's put 6 hours on top and then m miles on the bottom. Just to know, you always put the units that you're looking for on the top. So then miles cancel out and m also cancels out. And then you just end up with 5 times 6 hours, which is again 30 hours. Method 3 is the one that I always just recommend in general. It's where you set up the rate as a ratio. So for example, here it would be 6 hours for every m miles. And so since this never changes, you can just set it up to equal another ratio with the information that they gave you. Just make sure that your units are always consistent. So if you have hours on the top on the left side, then you need to have hours on the top on the right side, and miles should be on the bottom then. So for example, here we don't know how much time it is, so we're going to put x hours on top. And then they told you that you traveled at 5m miles, so that should go on the bottom. Then you would cross multiply, but before we cross multiply, it's easier to do it without all the units. So I'm just going to rewrite this as 6 over m is equal to x over 5m. And you don't have to worry about the units because everything will cancel out except for the unit that you're actually looking for. Now that we have this, let's cross multiply. So the first side would be 6 times 5m is equal to m times x. And then if you notice, the m's cancel out, and then you end up with 30 is equal to x. If you forgot the units, just go back to your original setup and see where x is. X is on the numerator, and then you know on the left side that your units are hours. So this should just be 30 hours right here. And again, your answer is going to be A. Question 2. If 2x plus 4 is equal to 100, what is the value of 6x plus 12? Technically, you can take the original equation, 2x plus 4 is equal to 100, solve for x, and plug it into the equation that they want and find your answer. But this is the SAT, so they kind of assume you already know some algebra, and most people are trying to find ways to cut time. So one strategy is to take the original equation and see if you can manipulate it so it looks like the equation that they want. If you notice the 2x, you can multiply this by 3 and get 6x. So let's see what happens if you take the original equation and multiply each side by 3. So on the left side, you can distribute the 3 and you would end up getting 6x plus 12. And on the right side, you would get 300. If you notice, the left side of the equation, which is 6x plus 12, is exactly what they want. And we know that 6x plus 12 is equal to 300, which means that the answer should be B. Question 3. A length of 8 furlongs is equivalent to how many meters? Use 1 furlong is equal to 201 meters. As mentioned in question number 1, it's helpful to write down the units that they're asking for. So here they ask you for how many meters. Let's just go ahead and write down that all the answers should be in units of meters. They also gave you a conversion, which probably means you're going to have to use it. This is a conversion problem, which is definitely on the SAT. I'm going to use method number 3 that I mentioned in question number 1, which is where you take the conversion or a rate and set it up as a fraction. So I would write this as 1f over 201 meters. And I would set this equal to another fraction and put the information that they gave us. The most important part is just to make sure that your units are consistent, meaning like on the left side, if furlongs are on top, then make sure on the right side you also put the same units. So in this case, they said that you had 8 furlongs. So I would put 8F on the top, and then it's asking for how many meters, so we obviously don't know that, so I'm just going to put X meters on the bottom. The next part is to cross multiply. You can go ahead and just do that. I'm just going to rewrite it without the units just because it's easier to see. And then I would go ahead and cross multiply. So then we first have X times 1 is equal to 201 times 8. So we have X is equal to 1608. And if you forget the units for X, you can always refer back to the original setup and see what unit you wrote down. So in this case, it would be meters. And the answer would just be D. If you want to use dimensional analysis, then you would write down 8 furlongs and then multiply it by the conversion that they gave you. Just make sure you use the units that you're looking for on top. So in this case, we would say 201 meters over 1 furlong, and then the furlongs would cancel out, and then you would end up with 1608 meters. This method is totally fine if you're comfortable setting up the conversion. Question 4. The curve models the number of fish in a certain population. If you get a graph early on, it probably means you're just getting tested on how to read the graph. So one helpful thing is to pay attention to the labels for the X and Y axes. For the Y axis, the label is number of fish, and then for the X axis, it's number of months after January 2015, meaning that this 0 right here represents months post January 2015. The question actually starts right here, and it says, which of the following is closest to the number of fish in the population 16 months after January 2015? So again, this is just testing you on how to read the graph. So you would go to the 16th month after January 2015, then go all the way up to the line and maybe make a dot for the data point. And then the next step is to go all the way over to the y-axis to read the number of fish. So this data point is in between 14,000 and 16,000 fish. So a good number is probably 15,000 fish, which is actually answer C. Question 5. What is the ratio of AB to BC? All you have to do here is just read the measurements. So the length of AB is 20, the length of BC is 5. So it's just 20 to 5, which is just answer B. Question 6. Each of the whole numbers from 1 to 20 is written on one of 20 identical pieces of paper. So I'm just going to stop here. When I read something like this where there's a bunch of numbers and I see fractions, I automatically think that this is going to be a probability problem. So let's keep reading. It says here, the pieces of paper are then put into a hat and mixed together. If a piece of paper is selected at random from the hat, what is the probability that the number on it is a multiple of 3? So this is definitely a probability problem, and probability is equal to what you want over total options or total possibilities. So in this problem, we have the probability of multiples of 3, which I'm just going to call as 3m, over all the options you have or all the total numbers that are possible. So recall that you only have numbers 1 through 20. So I'm just going to write 20 on the bottom. Since the biggest number we have is 20, it means that numbers greater than 20, like 21, 22, can't work. So the definition of multiples of 3 means just 3 times the number. And recall that 3 times 7 is equal to 21, which is greater than 20. So this doesn't work. But then you can assume that every multiple below that is okay. So for example, 3 times 6 is equal to 18. And that's definitely less than 20. So that works. And then every multiple below that should be okay. And I'm just going to write this all down so you guys can see. So again, the biggest multiple that we had is 3 times 6, which means that you have 6 options here. So then the probability is just going to equal 6 over 20, which is answer C. Question 7. The table shows the maximum depth in meters of the 5 deepest oceanic trenches. The first column gives you the trench name, and the second column gives you the depth in meters. The question actually starts right here, and it says, what is the range in meters of these 5 trench depths? Range is just a number and it's just equal to the biggest data point that you have minus the smallest data point. If you look in the second column, the largest depth is going to be 11,033 and the smallest depth is going to be 10,047. So you just have to subtract these two. So you take 11,033 minus 10,047 and you end up getting 986, which is answer D. They definitely expect people to use the wrong numbers just because like either you don't know what the definition of range is or you just misread the table. And so answers A, B, and C are not actually just random numbers. They're just different combinations of miscalculations. Question 8. Question 8 looks like a lot, but it's not that bad. One thing that's helpful, again, is to look at the axes and read the labels. So for example, the y-axis says relative yield in percent, and the x-axis says soil pH, and then you have a bunch of data points because this is a scatter plot. Let's go ahead and actually read the problem. It says the relative yields of corn expressed as a percent, which was the y-axis right here, and soil pH, which was the x-axis, were recorded for 5 samples. For the 5 samples, the relative yield of corn reached a maximum when the soil had a pH of 6.8, and then decreased as the soil pH increased. Which scatter plot could represent these data? I'm going to focus on this sentence where it says the relative yield of corn reached a maximum when the soil had a pH of 6.8, which means that if you have a graph at x equals 6.8, where x represents the pH, your relative yield, or the y value, should be the maximum. Let's keep reading. And then decreased as the soil pH increased. Meaning, as you're going to the right on the x-axis, so your pH is increasing, the data points should fall below whatever was at x equals 6.8. It doesn't have to be a line, it just looks like a line on my graph right now. So the goal is to go through the answer choices and eliminate any graph where at x equals 6.8, you don't have a maximum data point. For example, if we look at answer A, if you go to x equals 6.8 or a pH of 6.8, this data point right here is pretty low compared to this data point. So then you know that A doesn't work. Again, for answer B, if you go to x equals 6.8, this data point right here, again, isn't the maximum. So let's eliminate answer B. For answer C at 6.8, it looks like this data point right here has the highest y value or the highest data point. Remember that the next data point has to be lower than, and that seems to happen right here. So let's put a check mark for answer C. And then for answer D, if you go to 6.8, again, this data point doesn't have the highest y value, so this is obviously wrong. And then you're stuck with answer C. Question 9. After a new car is purchased, the value of the car is modeled by a function that decreases exponentially over time. Which of the following could describe how the value of the car changes each year? If you need a refresher on exponentials, I have a helpful video on exponentials. Go ahead and check that out. A decreasing exponential graph looks like this. So it's not a line, and lines have a slope that's constant, meaning the rate of change is constant, meaning the amount that would be decreasing per year would be a very specific amount. So this is an exponential graph, and you can see that the slope is constantly changing. So the rate of change is expressed as a percent, and that's just a rule of thumb. If you read answer A, it says each year the value of the car is $800 more than the previous year. So this is a very specific amount, so you can eliminate that. And also answer B says the same thing, except it's $800 less. So let's get rid of answer B. Answer C says each year the value of the car is 8% more than the previous year. And then answer D says each year the value of the car is 8% less than the previous year. So we're looking for an answer where it's saying that the amount keeps decreasing, and that would be answer D because it says that it's 8% less than the previous year. Question 10. Question 10 has a box plot, and box plots are definitely on the test. You will at least get tested on how to read a box plot. So make sure you know how to read one. Let's go ahead and read the problem. The daily high temperatures in degrees Fahrenheit for a city in the month of February in 2017 are summarized in the box plot shown. Which of the following is the closest to the median of the high temperatures in degrees Fahrenheit of the city in February 2017? So the question is asking you to find the median, meaning it's just asking you to read the box plot because this right here is the median. and the median is between the numbers of 41 and 45. Let's go ahead and eliminate any number above 45. So answers C and D don't work out. And answer A is 35, but 35 is right here, which doesn't make sense. So let's get rid of A. And then you're stuck with B, which is 42. And as you can see, 42 is pretty close to 41. Okay, so that was the first 10, and hopefully it wasn't too bad. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below and stick around for the next video. Thanks!